If depth is real and transformative, why does it not point in any particular direction? This question unsettles a basic modern assumption about meaning and growth. We tend to believe that depth must lead somewhere, that it should clarify what to do next, where to go, or who to become. Growth, in this framework, is understood as movement toward a goal, a purpose, or a clearly defined outcome. Yet lived experience often contradicts this model. The most profound insights people report, moments of deep clarity, understanding, or awareness, frequently do not provide instructions. They do not always translate into immediate action. Instead, they can feel strangely complete and directionless at the same time. Nothing seems missing, yet nothing is being pointed toward. This raises a critical possibility. Depth may not function as progress or movement at all. It may operate as presence without trajectory. Ibn Arabi articulates this idea with precision. True depth belongs to being itself, and therefore has no direction, because it is not moving toward anything. This is not poetic abstraction. It is a precise ontological and cognitive claim about how depth is experienced. From a psychological perspective, modern life is organized around direction. Many people experience anxiety when their lives lack a clear sense of where things are going. There is persistent pressure to define goals, paths, and outcomes, even during periods that feel inwardly complete. States of clarity that do not produce visible results are often dismissed as unproductive or indulgent. Cognitive science helps explain this pattern. Goal-oriented cognition prioritizes direction over presence, valuing outcomes more than states of being. Teleological bias leads the mind to assume that all meaningful states must serve an endpoint. Motivational overactivation makes it difficult to rest in experiences that are not instrumentally useful. These biases produce familiar symptoms. People may feel lost despite inner clarity. Directionlessness is equated with stagnation or failure. Overplanning and constant self-optimization become default responses to discomfort. Neurologically, this makes sense. The brain evolved to prioritize navigation, prediction, and movement. However, this evolutionary advantage becomes a limitation when applied to depth. Not all meaningful states are directional. A different framework is needed, one that explains depth without treating it as a path or trajectory. Ibn Arabi approaches this problem not as a theorist of purpose, but as a metaphysician of being. His concern is not primarily what reality is for, but how it is. Depth, in his framework, is not a function of intention or outcome. It is a property of reality itself as presence. This requires correcting several misconceptions. Ibn Arabi is not rejecting action, ethical responsibility, or practical engagement with the world, nor is he promoting passivity or aimlessness. His claim is more subtle. Depth does not originate from human goals, it precedes them. The core principle is this. What is deepest cannot point elsewhere, because it already contains everything. Direction implies movement from lack toward fulfillment. Depth implies fullness without displacement. Historically, this anticipates non-teleological ontology and nonlinear models of meaning. It also resonates with modern phenomenology of presence and cognitive models that Distinguish process from outcome. Ibn Arabi provides a framework in which depth is understood as presence, not progression. The first key distinction Ibn Arabi makes is between path and field. A path implies movement from one place to another. It assumes lack at the beginning and fulfillment at the end. Depth, by contrast, does not operate this way. It is not a route, it is a field. Conceptually, a field has extension and richness, but no destination. It can be entered, explored, or inhabited, but it does not point forward in cognitive terms. This corresponds to field awareness. This differs fundamentally from task-based attention. Task-based attention is directional and goal-driven. Field awareness is receptive and integrative. Practical example clarifies this distinction. Consider deep listening. When someone listens deeply, not to respond, persuade, or fix, the listening itself is complete. It does not aim toward an outcome, yet it is often in such listening that the most meaningful understanding arises. The insight here is that direction appears only when depth is reduced to utility, when depth is treated as a means to an end. It becomes a path when it is recognized as fullness. Direction dissolves. The key takeaway is simple. Depth has no direction because it is not incomplete. Ibn Arabi explains the dynamic nature of depth through the concept of tajalli, or self-disclosure. Analytically, tajalli refers to the continuous renewal of reality without forward motion. Reality reveals itself again and again, not by advancing toward something, but by reappearing in new forms. This creates a paradox. Renewal is happening constantly, yet there is no progress toward an endpoint. Modern science offers a helpful parallel. In dynamic systems with stable equilibrium, such systems change continuously while maintaining overall coherence. Awareness provides a clear example. Moment by moment, awareness renews itself. Experiences shift, perceptions change, thoughts arise and dissolve, yet awareness itself does not go anywhere. It remains present, stable and complete. This corrects a common misconception. Renewal does not imply advancement. Something can renew endlessly without moving forward. The insight here is that depth remains constant while appearances vary. Change occurs within depth, not toward something beyond it. Ibn Arabi applies this logic directly to consciousness. Awareness, in his view, can deepen without moving, spatially or temporally. Depth of consciousness is not measured by distance traveled. It is measured by integration achieved. Neuroscience supports this distinction through research on depth of processing that occurs without goal activation. States such as absorption or contemplative focus demonstrate that awareness can intensify even when no objective is being pursued. In absorption, attention becomes unified. There is less fragmentation, less internal conflict, yet there is no sense of moving toward a conclusion. Similarly, contemplative focus can feel deeply meaningful without suggesting any next step. This addresses an important misconception. Directionlessness is not confusion. Confusion lacks coherence. Directionless depth, by contrast, is highly coherent. The insight is that depth is measured by integration, not by trajectory, to explain how depth and direction coexist. Ibn Arabi introduces the concept of barzakh, an interface or threshold. Conceptually, barzakh represents the space between purposeful action and pure presence. Cognitive science identifies similar phenomena in task disengagement states, where goal-oriented processing temporarily suspends. These states are often associated with clarity, insight, or creativity. A familiar example is a moment of understanding that does not suggest what to do next. The understanding is complete in itself. It does not demand translation into action. In such moments, directional thinking pauses. Depth becomes apparent. The insight here is precise. Depth emerges when directional thinking suspends but is not an absence of action. It is a threshold where action is no longer the organizing principle. Why is direction so often mistaken for meaning? Ibn Arabi locates the answer in the self's need for control. Direction provides orientation, prediction, and narrative continuity. It allows the self to feel in charge. Psychologically, this aligns with control bias and fear of non-instrumental states, when experiences cannot be used, explained, or directed. They threaten the self's sense of agency. This leads to a critical misconception that meaning requires movement. Ibn Arabi rejects this. Meaning does not depend on progress. Direction organizes action. Depth sustains being. The insight is that directionlessness feels threatening because it removes control. Narratives without a sense of where this is going. The self loses its familiar reference points. What remains, however, is not emptiness, it is depth itself, applied practically. This framework invites several cognitive shifts. One is allowing states of depth without forcing outcomes. Another is separating presence from productivity, recognizing that not all meaningful states need to be useful. This shift is associated with reduced stress, reactivity, and improved emotional regulation. When the demand for direction relaxes, the nervous system settles. Greater coherence becomes possible. This has practical relevance in burnout recovery, existential uncertainty, and creative or contemplative work. For example, instead of immediately asking what next, one can rest in clarity as clarity without translating it into plans. The result is greater psychological stability and coherence. Depth becomes something that can be trusted rather than something that must be converted into direction. The core insight can now be stated clearly. Depth has no direction because it lacks nothing. What is deepest does not lead elsewhere. It is already whole. Reframed this way, direction is revealed as a feature of action, not of being. Action requires goals. Being does not. Ibn Arabi offers a model in which depth is trusted as complete presence, allowing meaning without movement and clarity without trajectory. In this model, depth does not solve the problem of direction. It dissolves the assumption that direction is required for meaning at all.